process to add to it, and that was they were going to figure out how to fund it. And that's where Cheryl comes into it, is, and I'm going to let her speak on her own, but she has a huge background in grants and finding grants and utilizing grants. And she's just an incredible person, an incredible human being that brings a lot to the table that this community gets to be a part of. So we know where we started, we know where we went to.
Could you use the mic, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is for the recording.
So, a couple other things that this format is about. That's what I wanted to talk to when I was introducing the council. The format of this program that Carnegie Mellon is bringing is a bottom-up way to identify problems in your community and have the community solve it. So it's not a top-down. So when you see the council people and you see the mayor and you see us in here, you need to remember that what we are is we're citizens in this setting. That we're not anything other than that, and it's important to remember that. There's a lot of groups in this community that would like to actually be maybe piggyback or actually be a sign-on or whatever, there's probably a better word for it. But again, to those groups, what I would say to them is, we welcome you as individuals. That's what we want. We want individuals. We don't want 10 or 15 groups that think that they already know what the problems are and already have the solution. We're looking for the solution to come from within. And I think that's important that Cheryl's going to touch on that. It's just important that I share that early on. I think what's going to happen in the process is we're going to find our core. We're really going to find out who we are as a community. And when we find that core is going to take us to our vision. And in this community, if I haven't talked to over half of you, most of the people I talk to in this community always ask them, what's our vision? Where are you 5 leaders taking us? Well, I think once we discover our core through this process, that core is going to take us to the vision, and that's solving our problems. And like I said, it's going to be from the bottom up. And it's going to create an environment, one where we talk to one another, we listen to one another, where we all feel in our community that we can be heard. And from that process, we're going to create an environment that says that we can all be the best that we can be in our community. And again, this process is going to take us there. It's going to help us to rediscover what we are and who we are and where we're going to go. So with that, I had 2 songs that as I was meditating and contemplating and getting scared about being up here talking, the young bloods, and I'm glad that this is our age group, sang a song, Get Together. I'd like you guys all to Google that and just really take a look at that song, because that's what this is about. And then there's another one by the Buffalo Springfield, which I know we all know about, most of us. And that's For What It's Worth. It has a little more to do with Vietnam, but you know what? The bottom line is, it's about us taking a look around and figuring out how we can solve our problems. And I think that's where we are as a community. So, Cheryl, I'm going to let you take over. You have your mic, and I'm going to shut this off. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Randy. Is that too loud? It's all right? How about this? Is that better? Okay. So my name is Cheryl Dahl, and I am potentially project lead on this initiative. I wanted to give you a little bit of additional history to what Randy talked about, because we're talking about the history not just of CMU and Ojai, but also kind of how did my colleague Terry Irwin, who's not here tonight, and I come to this work? What's our background? What can you expect from dealing with us? So as Randy said, we did a first demonstration workshop back in January of 2017, and another follow-up one in May. And those were demonstrations that a group of citizens who happened to know Terry personally and knew she was working on a program at Carnegie Mellon to develop this transition design program. And so they asked her to come and talk about it and explain what was it, would it possibly be useful to the folks in Ojai dealing with water scarcity. So those 2 workshops were a kind of a test run to see, was there anything of interest here for all of you? And some of the people who attended decided yes, and we continued to have conversations. I entered the picture the following fall when I started working at Carnegie Mellon as an adjunct professor. So Terry's been working to try to change the world of design education. From her perspective, how we got to some of these big environmental problems started with the people who make things, processes, products, objects. We have issues with plastics because we built a lot of things out of plastic, right? And we solved a lot of short-term problems, but created many long-term problems because designers didn't necessarily have a system way of thinking, right? So she's trying to say, how do we create a curriculum that would create an entire generation, a new generation of designers who know how to think about systems and know how to think about a context and a long term for whatever it is that they're designing, right? My work has been out there in the field of practice. I started my career as a journalist. I spent about 10 years writing about business and technology, and then eventually social entrepreneurship, which is basically trying to take business solutions or business insights and use them to solve social or environmental problems. And I got so entranced with all of this problem solving that I thought, you know, it might be more interesting to go do that than write about it. And so I defected to the nonprofit sector and started working analyzing systems. So I was working for a place called Ashoka on the East Coast, and they find and fund social entrepreneurs. They have a network of about 3,500 social entrepreneurs all over the planet who work on solving multiple types of problems. And my job was to say, let's find all of them that are working on, for instance, preventing human trafficking, see the patterns in their work, understand what that tells us about the problem itself, and then what sorts of solutions we should try to incubate or fund to solve things, right? So while I was doing that work, I ran into a foundation that was interested in saving the fish, sustainable seafood. How can we rope back in our global overfishing? So how many of you know anything about the global overfishing problem? Yeah, I figured this audience would have quite a bit of background. For those of you who don't, who among you here are sushi lovers? Yeah, I'm about to ruin your evening. So about 90% of the world's oceans are overfished, or they are fished at maximum capacity. We take 97 million metric tons of seafood out of the ocean every year, and we then take an additional 25 to 33 million metric tons of illegal seafood on top of what is legally harvested. It's really easy for that illegal seafood to make it into the supply chain because we do a terrible job of tracking fish. More than a third to 2/3 in some areas of the world of the seafood is mislabeled. When you eat red snapper, it's only red snapper 13% of the time. And the worst rate of mislabeling happens in sushi restaurants, where up to 75% of what's on the restaurant items are mislabeled, right? So we're trying to fix that, and that's what I started work on 8 years ago, right? And I spent 8 years working in different communities all over the world, Lombok, Labuhan, Indonesia, places in Vietnam, in Chile, here in the United States, working with different stakeholders who are part of creating this problem of overfishing, and then figuring out how do they participate in solutions, right? And also, how do we do it in a way that respects all the other challenges that are part of this complex problem? So we're not just looking to say, let's tell fishermen to stop fishing, because then, of course, that means their livelihood goes away. So if that is part of what needs to happen for the environment to survive, where is the alternative livelihood that we can start to make available, right? So trying to embrace the full complexity of these problems. So I've spent about 10 years now total working on fisheries and other complex systemic problems. And I met Terry back in 2015, and she, at a conference where we were both speaking, and she said, "This is amazing, you are doing transition design. I've been looking for someone who had years of practice doing this." And I said, really, transition design? That's awesome. I didn't know I was doing transition design. I thought the name of what I was doing is you're crazy and this will never work, right? And so naming things is useful, right? But it also is slightly intimidating because you wind up with a sense of distance from the issue. Transition design is a jargony term. It sounds like something that is academic, which it is. So what do we mean when we say transition design? And quite simply, it's saying starting where you are and identifying where is that place that you are. What's the lack? What's the abundance? Where are you? And identifying a place you want to go and figuring out a way to get there, right? It's that simple in terms of concept. And of course, the complexity of designing that pathway and doing it with lots of stakeholders and doing it in a way that is respectful to all of the groups involved is challenging, right? And so we have to come up with a methodology to do that. And that's what I've spent 10 years refining. How do we design a process that takes us from where we are to where we want to go, right? Some of it begins with this idea of visioning, right? And we did demonstrations of this previously, but what we're hoping to do is have Ojai come to a collective vision. And it's not just about water scarcity, it's about this idea of resilience. What does resilience mean? You will all define it, right? And this idea of resilience will have in it multiple threads and the plurality of voices of folks in Ojai, because this is a community-led project, right? When we start to get to this place of going from A to B, the way that we make it happen is that we've figured out through all of this work in the field what the primary ways are that communities that are trying to solve big problems and move together collaboratively through inventing ideas, we figured out what are the roadblocks for them. And there's really 4 big ones. I actually call them the 4 horsemen of the status quo. So first is myopia, right? So we can only see a problem in a particular way. We've gotten stuck, right? And we don't have a different lens or different way to get into it. An example of this is I'm doing some work right now on domestic violence. And for years, a lot of the focus of domestic violence was trying to figure out how do you get women to reach out to the services that they need to avail themselves of to get out of these abusive situations. And it was all focused on how do we make these services more effective, how do we figure out how to put flyers out there or make 1-800 numbers more available. And then at some point, somebody took a different angle and said, what if we thought about all the activities in the day of a woman who's potentially experiencing domestic violence? Where might there be an intersection between an activity that has nothing to do with seeking out that information, but might be a place you could deliver it, right? And what they found was that that perfect transaction was going to a hair salon, because it's a safe place where there are not likely going to be any men. It's a place where a private conversation can happen that others can't overhear. It's also a place where some of the physical signs of abuse may be apparent. And so they started training hairstylists to be able to recognize the signs of abuse and give them information to help women find help, right? That's a different way of looking at the problem, a different angle, and a different intervention. So what we do is try to provide some new research, some new insights, some ways to get at new angles on the problems that you're trying to solve. The second is fragmentation, and this happens everywhere, the horsemen of fragmentation. People are working in silos, they're not talking to each other. There are already solutions that are at play in Ojai for all different kinds of problems, and you may not know what they all are. We just started building a database of all the community leaders and all the stuff they're working on in the last 3 weeks, right? And that's going to be shared publicly. And what we can start to do by coordinating those efforts is amazing, right? The ways that you can eliminate some of the duplication, the way that you can partner some organizations together and reduce the overall effort is a really great opportunity. The third big one is oversimplification, right? We all suffer from this because we want there to be a direct, simple response. We'd like for there to be one answer. The problem can be fixed by doing X, right? We like to simplify, especially when we're dealing with these big, roiling topics that have so many avenues and so many overlaps with other issues, right? But in doing that, we start to limit what's possible. And we also start to implement ideas that don't actually follow and don't give you the full breadth of creativity that could come into play. And finally, the biggest one, which is conflict, right? So conflict is everywhere, and unfortunately, we've started to look at how we solve things as a community in this very binary way of who wins and who loses, right? Either my opinion carries the day or your opinion carries the day. Either my solution wins or your solution wins. And actually, you can accomplish a lot without getting to agreement, right? We convene and run process based on creativity, not consensus. We're not asking people to agree. What we're asking for is for them to give their creative energy to a process to generate new ideas. And there's lots of diversity that can live in that group of new ideas that doesn't have to come from exactly the same perspective. And the interesting thing is that if you actually take away the need to agree, the need to get to a compromise or consensus, and leash the creativity, you end up making friends that you otherwise would have become enemies with because you were focused on the conflict and the place you didn't agree. I've seen this happen over and over again in different communities. The best example was one of the first workshops that I did in the world of fisheries. One of the attendees was a man by the name of Dune Lankard. He's a native fisher out of Alaska, one of the last 150 EACs left on the planet. His entire tribe was wiped out, and a big cause of that destruction was the commercialization of fishing in Alaska, right? So when big companies came in and started doing commercial processing and mass producing salmon fillets, the livelihood of members of his tribe disappeared. They brought in foreign workers who brought with them opium and alcohol, which introduced all kinds of new problems into the tribe. And so Dune has no real love of the processing industry, right? It's not only that he sees them as potentially destructive to the environment, it's also a painful part of his history, right? So I put him in the room with a man by the name of Jerry Knecht, who is a processor based out in Boston. And Jerry's been in that industry for a long time and grew up on boats, and his family's been in the fishing industry for multiple generations. And the two of them sat next to each other at a table and worked on what would new solutions to ending overfishing look like. And at the end of that 2-day workshop, Dune was asked by one of the funders who was there what he thought of what had happened during the workshop. And he said, you know, this was really surprising for me because when I came here, I wasn't too excited to be in a room with people who represent everything terrible that's happened to my people, right? And over the course of these 2 days, I met this guy, Jerry, and we've had conversations. And he said, we used to have this joke when I was growing up that there were 7 of us around the table, 7 kids, and we used to joke that we were 7 little Indians around the table. And he said, I think Jerry would have made a great 8th little Indian. So going from, you are my mortal enemy, to you could be my brother, right? In the space of a few days where they got to work together instead of fight with each other, right? That is possible. It's a way of reframing the whole need to go to conflict first, as opposed to do it in a limited way, in a particularly contained context when it is absolutely necessary. And there are moments like that, but doing it as a free-for-all actually destroys the creative energy of the process. But Ojai is really unique. How are you going to take this process and run it here, right? It is. It absolutely is. One of the biggest ways in which you are unique is the turnout that's in this room, right? A year ago, I did a workshop in Chicago on affordable housing in a neighborhood called Rogers Park. Rogers Park alone has 55,000 people in it. It's a neighborhood in Chicago. We advertised widely. We promoted this workshop or series of workshops we were doing. We ended up getting 17 people at the first one, and we got 13 at the second, right? That's more typical of what it looks like to try to get people energized about working in their own communities. So you could say you were able to knock me over with a feather when we posted this workshop or this gathering online, and within 8 hours we had maxed out the tickets, right? That is amazing. That is such an amazing asset to start with, right? It also means that we need to get bigger locations, and we need to understand that there's an enormous amount of momentum already, and we need to catch up to you, and message heard loud and clear, right? So how do we customize what we do? Well, the thing we do is we listen to your story, right? I'm a journalist. I spent my life writing stories, and so I spent a lot of time listening. That's what I was doing here when people were coming in, was talking to people and listening. The other way we do that is by using anthropologists to go out into the field and interview and observe and really deeply understand the culture of different groups that are in Ojai, right? And what we're going to look at is, why do people do what they do? What are their rationales for doing what they do? Not just the ones they can tell you about, but the ones you can observe. Because if you can see what motivates people, you can understand how you might incentivize them to do something different, right? We've used that in a lot of different cases throughout the history of the fish work. Most interestingly, I think at the beginning of the project, when we sent anthropologists to 8 different locations around the world to watch people sell fish. And the idea was that there were hidden things in the seafood supply chain that were breaking down this will to fish sustainably. So how was the industry organized around unsustainable fishing and overfishing? And what we wound up finding out was, at the time, the theory of change of all the folks who were working on this problem was that if you can get Walmart and Target and big retailers to buy the right fish and to not buy fish that were endangered fish, that change would ripple through the whole supply chain. If you get the big player to buy differently, everything falls like a chain of dominoes. And that wasn't happening. And what we ended up finding out was that there were behaviors that were really stuck points in the middle of the supply chain. Nobody had been bothering to talk to distributors and processors because there was an assumption that if the buyers told them what to do, they would leap and follow and ask how high, right? What we ended up finding out was that the business model of the middle of the supply chain is premised on fraud, because what comes up in the net is a wild harvest. It's fairly unpredictable, and we all want the same 5 fish every day. And so that middle player has to deal with this crush of the demand not meeting the supply. And so the benign way to do that is to get on the phone, because most fish today still globally is sold on the phone, not digitally. The fish world does not have a futures market. Most of the fish is landed and recorded with pen and paper, right? So you get on the phone back to the customer and you say, I know you ordered that box of haddock, but the truck broke down. And so I don't have it, but I got this great mackerel, and it's going to cook up very similarly. I'll send you an extra box, and I'll knock $5 off the cost. And so the customer feels like, I got served. I got great service, very personal service. And what actually happened was that scarcity was disguised, right? And that's great for the middle of the chain player. The not so benign version of that looks like take the skin off the fish and call it whatever you want to call it. And that's how you wind up eating tilapia when you think you're eating red snapper, okay? Nobody in the NGO world really understood that. And so when we started telling them, you think the problem is that the seafood supply chain is immoral, and they are ravaging the ocean, and they don't care about the environment. And actually, they have a very clear and present challenge around their business model, right? And the way that this industry works. And if we can help them solve that problem and force the bad players out by doing it, we could get alignment. So it was a whole new way of thinking about the problem, and a whole new way of thinking about where we might intervene, right? And there's a longer story there about how unpopular that was at the time and how much time it took us to get that adopted. I can save that for the Q&A part. But the idea is that when we do this research here, I fully expect we will find as many unexpected motivations and unexpected stories that some of you don't know, right? And it is at the heart of your misunderstanding of why other players do what they do and the ways that you're explaining their behavior to yourself, most often demonizing them, because that's what we do as human beings, right? When actually there's rational reasons. That doesn't mean that we want things to continue the way they are, but it means that you actually can start to understand and have empathy for where they are, and we can design a different pathway, right? So what does this look like on the ground? once we get going, what does the work actually look like? So you guys have a handout because I wasn't able to get this any larger than this, which I know you can't see from the back. But you have a handout that is a replica of this. This is a map of what the transition design process looks like. And there's a few things I just want to be able to point out to you. First, this is the process that's all aligned around generative activity. What we're trying to do is create an environment where the community surfaces its vision, what you care about, the values that matter to you collectively, and then start to surface ideas that will lead you toward that future, right? And then implement them. So this is where we are. This is where we are in a linear sense. We're at the very beginning of this process. And we're in a phase that I call sense making. And so that's things that involve us making lots of phone calls and doing interviews with people in the community, us starting to understand what are the multiple issues and challenges that Ojai faces that people are naming. How do we learn who the people are in the community who might want to participate? So all that is getting organized, learning, us learning your story. Then we would kick off with research that would include more interviews. It would also include research into some of the topic issues, so us becoming more conversant with the specifics of water scarcity here, but also how it's being solved in other places. Also, I think there are multiple issues here, and I think I want to keep reemphasizing this. This is not just about water. It's about a full vision of all the issues that are related to what is keeping Ojai back. We would also then do the ethnography during this phase. After we've done research, then we do a series of design workshops. And what that means is that we're offering up an opportunity for people to come in and we'll present back to you, here's what we learned in the community. And I guarantee you there will be similar reframes to what I was talking about in the world of seafood, right? Where there's a situation that you've seen as X and really it could be seen as Y, right? And once we've done that and done a little bit of sense making in that workshop about what's our shared understanding that might be different about a problem now, they'll be brainstorming. And what comes out of those design workshops are actual projects, right? So you can participate in a design workshop and be part of the genesis of new ideas. You don't necessarily have to be someone who wants to run something, but some of you will. Some of you will actually be entering this process with the idea that I have an idea that I care enough about that I'd like to give up my daytime job, or I have a daytime job where I can implement this idea, right? And that's what these incubated projects look like. These are going to be projects that will be supported by the project, the initiative overall. So we raise money for these projects to exist, and we don't manage them, but we provide support as necessary. So very often what that has looked like in the past is that we provide a project manager or someone who is checking in on strategy or someone who's recruiting partners, right? It's basically saying this entrepreneur or person who's leading a new project may not have all the resources that he or she needs to move a project forward. Then we can offer our Rolodex, our network, all of the resources that we have to support. In addition, there's independent projects. And not every project that's going right now that's an initiative is going to want to participate in our process, and that's fine. There will be some that decide to link up where we're sharing information, or there are ways that we're offering resources even though they were already running when we got here. So a big part of what I want to note is that this visioning process runs parallel to the doing process. And visioning, this could be a cycle of 2 years. Not 2 years before you get to a vision, but 2 years of, here's one version of a vision, and then it evolving throughout that period of time. And working out the different pieces of it. So what's both the detail of the vision and then what's called backcasting. So you know what your goal is, then how do you work backward from that and identify some milestones that need to happen that would then inform what some of your incubated projects need to be, right? But we're not holding up the getting stuff done piece, right? So some of the sense making is me landing here in Ojai, noting who's running and starting to run next to them to understand how can we be of service, right? Because we can actually start to provide some of our resources and some of our help to projects that already exist and see where we can offer some value without that having come out of our process, right? So this isn't about Carnegie Mellon or transition design providing an overall umbrella to control or dictate or even build a path. It's about providing a collaborative platform that will allow any player who wants to connect with us and get some of the benefit to potentially do that. Right? Not every project will wind up here, and there are gates to get through to wind up here that have to do with evaluation criteria we've put together over the last 10 years, being able to recognize what types of projects, what types of leaders will succeed versus which ones won't. Right? So there are criteria to get here, but this also gets input from the community. We're going to be establishing an advisory board of people who will help make choices about which of the ideas that surface in the design workshop wind up here. The other piece that I want to emphasize is that this process is not about Carnegie Mellon or myself representing Flip Labs hanging out in Ojai and making a living off of your problems. Right? The way that this process works, we try to amplify whatever we spend on the process by at least 5 to 10x for what we raise for incubation, which is flow-through capital that goes into the community and into projects. So an example of that is when we worked in the world of fish, one of the components we identified of how do you make this middle of chain behave differently was they need better technology. Right? We need to actually be tracking fish the same way that we track computer chips, where we need to have barcodes, we need to have sophisticated systems. And so that wasn't very appealing to people in the fish industry because that closes this back door that they have to use fraud or this elaborate workaround to kind of make the balancing of the fish work. So we spent $25,000 writing a research report that talked to the fish industry and explained to them, here's all the ways you can make more money from using data to sell your fish, or here's all the cost savings you could achieve, right? And we went through a couple case studies, got very detailed about different types of software. That kicked off a process that has resulted in raising more than $7 million that has gone into projects. Because we were able to persuade industry people to get interested in doing these kinds of tech pilots. We were able to persuade philanthropists to put money into projects on the ground and pilots of this kind of implementation of technology. So I don't know that your ratio would look exactly the same, but that is one of the metrics that we are committed to reporting on as part of our transparency. Right? So, if we're not here to make a killing, what's in it for us? What's in it for CMU and what's in it for me as both a member of CMU's faculty and owner of a business that's helping lead the project? So for Carnegie Mellon, a big thing is that Terry's trying to create a curriculum for designers to show them a whole new world. And so a live case study where students may be able to, in a supervised way, contribute to the project winds up being something that's going to light them up and get them inspired and give them some training so when they go out into the world, they actually can be different, right, than the designers that came before them. It also means that we can use what we learned from this project to create curriculum and also models for other communities to use. That kind of building of the body of academic knowledge around how transition design can work is useful for both Carnegie Mellon to be a leader in that field, but also for other communities to really be able to take these lessons and implement them. And for me, I like to say that what I do for a living and the thing that gives me meaning is that I work on impossible problems with extraordinary people. And for me, this is a room full of extraordinary people. That's why you're here. And I love being part of that process, and that's kind of my reason for being. And so being part of this project is about that for me. My company is called Flip Labs, and it is all about how you flip a situation and make a turn. I have a for-profit side of the company, and I have a nonprofit side of the company. And the reason that I do that is that projects like this go through the nonprofit side of the house, where I have a fiscal sponsor who oversees all the money. It never comes to the for-profit side of the house. So it is managed in a way so it's in the interest of the public. So after spending 10 years in the nonprofit world, I'm really used to things like make your own cheese plates. So what's our commitment? From Carnegie Mellon's perspective, we'd like to be here a long time. When Terry talks about the investment that Carnegie Mellon wants to make in the community and being part of this process, it's over years, right? Now that depends on us continuing to earn your trust and welcome here. Like, if you don't want us to be here, we leave. It's that simple. And we need to raise the money to do it, which is our commitment as well. So we've begun that process this summer. We have worked with what's called a prospecting firm to generate leads in the philanthropic community of folks that might want to fund this project. And we're just starting to get some of those recommendations back from the firm, and then we're going to go out and start pitching, right? And so what our commitment is that we're going to look to philanthropists to pay for this process. And believe me, we believe that they will be interested, because Ojai is kind of a crucible of many of the challenges that communities across this country are facing when it comes to climate change, when it comes to shifts in the weather, comes to all these kinds of effects and outcomes playing out, right? So if this can work in Ojai, it could work in Miami. If it could work in Ojai, it could work in Philadelphia, right? So there's similar challenges all over the place. And my commitment is that this is a journey. This is and many times it's a difficult journey. And what I'm signing up for is to walk it with you, right? We talk about that we're not consultants, we're embedded allies. I get calls from my entrepreneurs in the fish world at midnight. I have pictures of their newborn children on my phone. It's a very deep connection, because a big part of this work is to show up and believe in people, right? And that takes being there, it takes commitment, it takes authenticity. There's a phrase that I really like that's called journey mercies. And I got it from my grandmother, who used to do this thing where when I was home from college, or later when I moved to California and came home to visit, before I went back and head out to the world, she would make us all stand and hold hands and pray, and she would ask God to bring journey mercies. And I think about that as kindness, right? When I was on my way here, I almost missed my connection flight because it was one of those, there was a delay, and then it turned out the gate that I landed at was here, and the gate I needed to get to was here, so I had to run, and it was exhausting. I did make it. And the only reason I made it is because my seatmate on the flight that arrived in Phoenix, when we landed, they had made the announcement, yeah, there's some people on the plane who have tight connections, and usually most people ignore that, right? And so you've been that person in the back of the plane where you're like, oh my God, people, really? And we landed, and she saw me like frantically paging to the back of the in-flight magazine to understand the map of where the gates were so I could get there. And she said, honey, do you have a tight connection? And it was a woman who was probably in her 70s, and her husband. I was the window seat, of course. And I said, I do. And she said, well, let's change places, and then my husband will get up right away, and you'll be in the aisle and be able to go. And it was a straight shot up the aisle. I got out of there in like really fast. It was the only reason that I made the connection. It was just that kindness. My grandmother actually is the reason I'm not going to be spending the rest of the week here. She passed away this last weekend, and so I'm headed from here to her funeral. And so I was thinking about her Journey Mercies story on the plane and realizing that that's just a fundamental part of this work as well. Graham would call it, God, and I call it human kindness, but it's those small ways of seeing each other and offering kindness that make the tough stuff doable. And that's my commitment to you, that what we will generate together is that kind of kindness. What I'm looking for from you, short term, is before you leave, I'd like you to take one of these tiny Post-it notes and put your name on it. If you haven't signed in, I want your phone number or your email as well, and show me where you fit here. If you are really interested in being part of the design workshops, then I would like to see you put your sticky there. If you'd like to be part of one of the incubator projects, or you think you might be up for that, put it there. If you're independent, you just want to let me know you're running something already, do that. If you don't know, but you're super excited, just put it on the edge, and we'll figure out where you belong. But this is a process that's going to be accessible to everyone, right? We're going to figure out how to make this something that makes everyone feel heard. Having your say is not the same thing as having your way, But what we're going to do is create this culture of listening and kindness. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you've got.
A couple things I want to say that resonated with me. My grandmother was a 19th century woman, and she continues to live in my head in terms of how you have to make choices that make sense philosophically, that make sense from ethical, and she kind of taught me sustainability from living a life that demonstrated to me that a lot of Southern California achieved the highest quality of life before World War II. And Ojai represents to me a remnant of trying to keep that vision alive in the face of overwhelming, deadening sprawl and et cetera. And that's why I'm so committed to this community. And in terms of achieving that, managing that life of maintaining a good community character into the future in the face of the challenges and everything that comes in on you in terms of maintaining that. I was inspired listening to your talk about creativity as opposed to consensus. And just there's a creative tension that we have to accept that's part of the process of working through these challenges. It's not about all agreeing on something, it's about agreeing to disagree and work through it. And I find that very inspiring and very exceptionally well stated. So I'm just so pleased that you're here, and I hope everybody, all of you, please participate. And you know, the challenge is worth embracing about what we are, and I'm proud of what we are, and we need to meet the challenges of the future. It's not about just preserving the past, it's about embracing the continued reinvention of the future within the nature of our character. So I just think this is just absolutely a wonderful process, and I'm so glad to see everyone participating. Thank you. I'm not sure where to send this microphone.
Hi, thank you for your talk. Can you give me an example of an incubated project that you might have identified so far? And
Here?
yeah.
No, we don't do incubated products till we go through design workshops.
Oh.
I'd say that we've already identified independent products that are running, and those may wind up going through and getting amplified. But we don't make choices about that until we've got a different lens and input from the community and all that. So,
thank you.
Are you going to be going to the community of Ojai looking for money?
that's not part of the plan.
Okay.
Who wants the mic?
A couple of details. I was trying to take notes. I tried to take notes at the last meeting. You said there were 4 barriers to success?
It's kind of the four typical issues that plague projects like this.
And I think I got 3 of them. One was myopia.
Mm-hmm.
One was that we're not really trying to get, as Bill mentioned, consensus. Rather, we're looking for creative solutions, options. And I also heard conflict, but I think I missed the 4th one.
Fragmentation and oversimplification. Yeah. So myopia, fragmentation, oversimplification, and conflict.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
And then at what point are we going to begin to include the potentially 30% of our community in Ojai that doesn't speak English?
Yeah, that's actually part of the plan. We are putting up a website that should go up by early fall that will be in both Spanish and English that describes the project and is a contact site and a place to make announcements. We are going to be recruiting people to the team who speak Spanish fluently. My Spanish is iffy. And we're also already working with folks in the community to understand what would be ways to convene folks who aren't comfortable coming to a setting like this, right? So far we've done low-hanging fruit in terms of how we've convened. We know we need to work harder and actually have the community show us how to reach people who aren't easy to reach.
Okay, thank you. And I think there was just one little technical feedback on word choice. When you talk about citizens, I think we use that term very loosely, meaning everybody who lives around here.
Yeah.
But in the current climate that we are in, the term citizen, I think we need to take with an absolute definition, and I would prefer to try and replace the word citizen with residents, neighbors, members of our community, things like that, because I think when we do choose to use the word citizens, we effectively exclude those who are not. And I think that is a thing that is running in our community that we don't get to talk about much.
Yeah.
So that's all.
Thank you for that. That's a really useful correction.
Hi, my name is Julie Hahn, and I come out of an environment in a changer in the healthcare industry. And I just loved your grandmother, and I feel for her. I think her spirit.
101 years old, born in 1917.
Can you hear me? 101 years old.
Yes. May I have her tenacity?
Beautiful. Can you hear now? Can you hear now? Thank you. And her kindness. And I worked in the healthcare field as chaplain there, and was able to implement a reframing of not what's the problem, how much pain, da-da-da-da, what do you love? And it's a subtle shift, because it's a shift in perspective that doesn't say, what's the problem? What do we have to defend ourselves against? The urban sprawl, the this, the that, because that creates a, reality, but a different vibration.
Yep.
And when we enter into this presencing that I think you're offering in a way of listening from our heart, and that the human creative component is possible to solve all these problems. No, let me rephrase that. Not solve the problems, but come to them together. It creates a bond and a caring and a love and the kindness, because we're always going to be facing something. And it reframes it, and it invites in opportunity, creativity, because I think one of the things that the community has struggled with is this us against them and this other thing, and how is it, we're all here together, and we create a new ecology that creates all of us, all part of it, not Hispanic speaking or this or that, no, human kindness. So I thank you.
Other questions?
So is this plan just for the city of Ojai or the Ojai Valley?
So what we're starting with is an agreement with the city.
And I think that's important to understand. The city, at least what I've embraced, and I think most of the council has embraced, is that the way that there's actually a formal structure for this, that there is a thing called the Ojai Area of Interest, there's the Ojai Sphere of Influence, and the city as the only municipality in that realm, those two realms, does have a special role to play, as actually defined by state law. And I think we've, to some degree, as a city, neglected that responsibility to speak to the interests of the entire quality of life for the entire valley. It doesn't mean that we're trying to dictate. It means that as an organized city in that planning area, we have a responsibility to speak up in terms of the interests of that area. And there, it's not a matter of dictating; it's a matter of speaking for. And I think that you're seeing more and more of a sense of that responsibility among the city officials of all kinds and stripes.
In terms of how we think about starting this way and potentially expanding, it's so we have an MOU with the city. We will eventually have funders who are philanthropists, but my client is neither of those. My client is actually your vision. And to the extent that it is an Ojai city vision, then it pertains to Ojai. To the degree that we are able to continue to expand, involve other entities, and move that reach out and start to define a dream that has more components to it, it becomes larger, right? So what we're not trying to do is come in and say, well, we're going to plan for everyone and railroad people into the process. It's more, we're starting with an invitation here. And if we can earn our invitation here and keep it, we may be able to earn an invitation that's more broad.
I'll bring it to you after. I just want to thank whomever made this possible, and thank you for being here. I love this town. It has transformed me, and I know that it has transformed many people. And I believe that we can be an example and a leader in the face of climate change. We have brilliant people in this town who are tapped into a source of knowledge that is beyond the physical realm. And I'm so excited to hear the things that you're saying. And I applaud the piece of your presentation where you recognize that we tend to find a way to separate over details that really are not known to all people. And in bringing those things to light, we are able to come together. And I see that for this town, and I thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Goodrich. I think just for clarification, a question ago, what was being asked is the fact that are these programs going to be, or is access going to be granted for these programs to people who live outside of the city limits? Because I think, there's 30,000 some people in this valley and 7,000 people in the city. So, when we're talking about water scarcity, you're talking about agriculture and how many farms are actually in the city, I think.
From our perspective, the folks that are in the whole watershed pertain to this process. And I think we're interested in a coalition of the willing and the excited, and kind of where those borders are is less important. But we are trying to be really mindful of the politics that exist and being, just mindful of who to talk to and where to get buy-in and how to approach different parties.
So I just wanted to touch on something alluding to that same thought process. Cheryl and I are having dinner last night, and we were talking about what's in it for us as a city, and then it came down to what's in it for me. And I was real clear on what was in it for me, and that was that she was here. And I need to be real clear on how I look at this process. The MOU is between the city of Ojai and Carnegie Mellon. And I'd like to see the focus put on the city of Ojai. And as we identify our wicked problems, I think it'll be really easy to see how those problems are also in the area of our influence. But more importantly, as we challenge ourselves within and start identifying and start solving, it's going to be really easy to create a sense of, wow, they can do it, we can do it. And that's where the county might look at us and say, what are they doing, why are they doing it, and how can we do it? And then I think the other thing is there's going to be a lot of assimilation based on the fact of what you just said. The east end is farmers, the very west end is farmers. There's a lot of a diverse group of people in the valley. But again, I'm going to be selfish about it. And I am incredibly pleased that Carnegie Mellon has actually identified the city of Ojai and is going to allow us to be the guinea pig to their studies. And I think it's important that initially we focus on us. And as we, like I said, identify our problems, I think it's going to be really easy to see it's not just here, it's there, it's there, it's there. And especially when it comes to water. If we put water in the center of everything we do, water affects the economy of this community, water affects the environment of this community, water affects every aspect of who we are. And so therefore it's going to affect everything else that surrounds us. But if we identify specifically what we need, I think it's going to be easier to share that
and to also be more inclusive to other people that are outside of us. But, nobody didn't step on anyone's toes, but yeah.
Thanks, Randy. In conjunction with that, just to keep in mind, the county is in the process of updating the general plan over the next couple of years. So that unit of the cities that come together, I can't remember what it's called, VCOG or wherever, but I hope that we keep the channel of communication open in terms of what we're discovering here, because we really could serve as leaders in shaping the larger plan, especially since it is a system. And also the county issued recently an economic development plan, which we can keep in mind because the economy it's all really interwoven. So it'll be great to work consciously to keep those conversations open and to be leaders.
Thanks for noting.
Randy, I agree with you on most things, but on this one I don't necessarily agree, because I think the unincorporated area of Ojai is as much Ojai as the city of Ojai. And I think that what they do, the unincorporated area and those people in the unincorporated area have been such a huge part of the development of within the city, from the Libby Bowl to buying Shelf Road, the land about that. And they feel like they've been marginalized. I know those people, and they all feel like they've been marginalized. So I think it's very important that they look at the big picture, the entire picture. The Ojai Valley is Ojai, not the city of Ojai. And I think it's extraordinarily important because, I mean, it started with ag, and it's moved into, you know, we have our commercial zone, we have our ag zone, we have our health zone. And I think it's so important for you to realize this city is made of tremendously diversity, and all that diversity makes up the whole, which makes it unique. And if you eliminate and just concentrate on Ojai, you are eliminating, in my opinion, half of what Ojai is.
I agree with you 150%, Barbara. And I think that is one of our big problems structurally, is that there is a separation between the city of Ojai and the unincorporated area, which is like, it's not Ventura, it's not Ojai, what is it? And it is in fact a huge portion of the character and makeup of Ojai. So I think that's one of the most important problems that we have, along with water, is the structure of our city.
And just to add to it, I agree with the sentiment of what you're saying, and I think that obviously identifying problems in the city will lead to figuring out how we disseminate that information and those programs to the outer reaches. But you have to realize, I'd be interested to know, I mean, how many people in this room even live in the city proper? You know, it's like, I don't live in the city. I can't, yeah, it's like, yeah. Look, I mean, take a look at the room. And that's what we're consistently having an issue with. That is, you know, we're just not.
Well, that's what I was trying to get to in terms of the role of the city in the Ojai area of interest, which is basically the whole area, the entire Ojai Valley. And I think that we do have a responsibility to be part of that organic whole, and we haven't taken that role seriously enough in the past, and I think we need to more in the future.
I was just wondering, Randy, were you saying that because the point of contact is through Ojai, then that's the landing point from which something can start and spread through this Ojai area of interest?
I believe so. So here's the other part of that. And I said, I read the microphone real quick.
Okay, Aaron. Okay, Randy.
Here's the other part of it. And again, this isn't a debate, and I don't want it to be a debate. Okay? First of all, no one has said that anyone that doesn't live in the city cannot participate. If that was so, we would have checked you in at the door and not allowed you in. This is an open discussion. It's going to be a creative process, and we all need to be a part of it. All I'm trying to say is if we identify the issues within our community, it's going to be easier to take those out. We can change, once we go through the process, we identify what the problem is, we create the solution, then we take it back to the governing body, and they look at it and they figure out how can they change, how can we, or they, change ordinances, or what do we have to do to take what the community's asked us to do. That's why I'm saying our sphere of influence is the city. I have no control over anything that goes in the county. Now that doesn't mean that we can't take our solution to the county. Okay? What I'm just trying to say is, we're gonna, I believe personally that we need to work with them, and as that process builds and the creation that comes from it, we'll be able to take and utilize anywhere. So I don't know if I'm clear enough on that, but the MOU is with the city. Okay? The MOU is not with the county. So I just want to be clear on that. When information is gathered and it's going to be taken to the council to be disseminated, it'll be disseminated through us, through the city. I don't know how to, I don't know how to say that anymore.
No, I get it. I think with the clarification of, and maybe, I don't know if I'm alone here and I'm off topic, but are the initiatives and the ideas and the incubated projects that are going to be conceived here going to be dished out through the city? I mean, I think it's, and if that's the case, then
actually no.
Right, because what you're saying and what she was saying are kind of opposed, and that's why I'm just looking for clarification on that. And I agree with what you're saying. I'm looking for clarification. Yeah.
You're going to lose half the people here.
Who wants the mic? Who wants the mic? I get to the back.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask a couple of things. One, the visioning workshops, I imagine that the visions wouldn't be confined to the city of Ojai limits, but also I just wanted to ask a little bit about the process of the workshops and design and visioning workshops and what kind of makes your process unique. I mean, there's so many community engagement design workshops, and some of them are successful and some not, and I just wondered if you could touch on that.
Yep. So these are two different streams for a reason. They're handled in different ways. Part of what visioning does is it gives all the stakeholders a chance to be heard. And so we're still, we haven't started the scoping because we haven't quite got funders on the hook yet, and it's that you get that before you start the scoping. But one of the things that we know we've got to account for is that we think there will be hundreds of people who want to take part in visioning, right? And so what we need to do is take some of the tools that we've used in groups that are more like 30 or 40 and figure out how to scale them and how to do them in sequence. So the visioning workshop is stakeholder voices, and that starts to give us a sense of where there's conflict, but also where there's alignment. And one of the things that's interesting about doing visioning is that it actually helps you get more creative, because the further out into the future you go, when you think about what that vision of what you want the world to be looks like, it actually is very similar to what people who you think you disagree with think as well, right? That was actually one of the insights that came out of the second workshop that we did, was that people who had diametrically opposed ideas about how the water problem should be solved, so they need to give up more water, or they need to give up more water, or there needs to be less tourism, or whatever the kind of this is what it should be version was, when they talked about the future and the kind of place they wanted to raise their children in, or the kind of place they wanted to leave for their kids in the next generation, it was remarkably similar. So when we can start to track to a true north like that, that's very aligned, you start to be able to build incremental steps to get to it that you can then draft to, right? And start to understand, how do I get from here to this next incremental step? And again, because you're being creative about how do you get there, which is where you start to go with the actual design workshops, you're focusing more on where there's alignment. And the way that I set up the design workshops, they are very discrete slices of the problem. And so what we would do would be, to give you a concrete example in the world of fisheries, We don't set up a workshop where you've got a fisherman and the CEO of Royal Dutch Shell and people from Fiji and every player that's represented in the whole system of fisheries. We take a slice of it. And so we've done workshops with fisher communities who have very specific issues around how do they form cooperatives to get more buying power so they can start to influence the values of the seafood supply chain. And then we've done workshops with technologists who create programs and software and hardware for the seafood industry. So in a technologist conversation, there's only technologists and the people who are relevant to that, and the different layers you're pulling in the salient people who are really going to solve the problem. So it is these are more discrete slices of the problem, and that's done because what you're looking to do is getting stuff done. Like the underpinning of this and the values of it and the respect that's part of the process is great. And at the end of the day, I still want to get stuff done, right? So we organize all the design workshops around how do you move fast and how do you move efficiently. The visioning is messier and has all the stakeholders involved. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's one of the ways that we think about this being different. This other thing I will say about the visioning is that we were remarkably privileged to have part of Carnegie Mellon their design program has started to include this whole discipline of what's called forecasting, or sometimes known as futuring. But we have one of the world's premier academics in the field, Stuart Candy, who joined the design program this past fall. And the kind of work that he does is helpful in that it allows you to think about the future in a very concrete way. So some of what I've talked about with him, for example, with this work on domestic violence, the groups that I've been talking with are primarily women's shelters who work on the front lines and they provide direct service. And the gauntlet that they go through in a given year in terms of the trauma that they're witnessing and taking on, lives are lost. They lose clients. And there's been a continuing circumstance in California, but across the nation, of less funding and less funding and this mentality of scarcity. And so when I talked to these women about engaging in an innovation process about how we might think differently about even eliminating domestic violence, they literally could not imagine the world without it, right? And so what I talked to Stuart about was he does this great thing where he creates environments that are immersion experiences of the future. So if we were to basically say, what would a museum look like of the future of a world with no domestic violence? He would figure out how to build that, right? So one of the things that we can start to do is to leverage multiple assets at Carnegie Mellon to say, once we have this vision, what would it feel like to dance with that vision, right? And to be able to snatch pieces of it and bring it into the present to keep people excited and to keep them focused on that true north, right? Because if you're actually focused there and not on the short-term conflicts that are about the technical pieces of how you get there, you're able to stay focused and get stuff done.
Okay, I'm gonna tag on to that last question a little bit because it was really well explained. I really appreciate that. My question is a little bit more specific. If you could, Cheryl, if you could just be a little bit more specific about the next steps for community engagement in this process.
Yep.
So where do we go from here?
The very first next step are these yellow Post-its. And if you blew off the sign-in process, but you want to hear from us, rethink that. Go back and give us your email address. What we're starting to do is build this database of contacts here. And we are going to be, the product right now is in staging mode, I would say. And what this means is that we don't have formal funding. Carnegie Mellon has, they pitched in some money to keep me working part-time on this over the summer. I use some of that to hire an intern. So we are moving, doing the bootstrapping, right, that we're going to do up until the point we get funding. We are hoping to get funding landing in early to mid-fall, right? So in between now and then, I will be honest, we're going to be pressed to keep up with this level of enthusiasm, all right? As only one person managing the project part-time, I'm not going to be able to answer every single email in a really timely way. But we are going to work on putting up a website. We are going to be building this database. We are going to be doing interviews. And basically starting to map what's the existing community look like in terms of leaders who are working on independent projects now, folks who are at the intersection of multiple groups that we want to get to who could help us understand how do we do that kind of outreach and do it in a respectful and comfortable way. So all that kind of gumshoe reporting, which is my strength as a former writer and reporter, is what we're going to be doing up until the point we get funding. We'll continue to be transparent about how the fundraising is going, and I'll just let you know.
I don't want to, hi Cheryl, first of all, condolence to your family, losing your grandma, and I do want to thank you in terms of coming down here and still committing to this meeting. It is really exciting to me. It's not about whether you live in Ojai, it's not whether about if you live in the valley, it's whether we are sustainable as a community to really raise our future generations and respect our past, respect the values of this community. And that's what excites me, hearing some trigger words like working from the bottom up, knowing how to be creative, how to work with stakeholders. I mean, I think we think it's a unique community, and I think that we could come up with some creative ways and a great vision to sustain that community, whether you live in the city or in the county. And I'm just excited to get my yellow ticket and put it on that poster that you have there. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who's next? Somebody else have a comment?
When you say fundraising, what level of fundraising are you forecasting?
So in 8 years of leading the fundraising for fish activities, after the first or second year of ramping up, we landed between $1.5 and $2 million a year, and I don't see why that's not possible here.
Thanks.
Can I just add something since the mic passed about? You know, I just wanted to, you talked about the whole process. I think it includes a lot of listening, right? And I just want to say what I heard you say, Randy, even though a lot of us reacted, including me, who doesn't live in the city. I didn't hear you say anything that excluded anybody else. What I heard you say was speaking from your formal authority as a council member and the formal authority that you and Bill and other council members have organized in coordinating action representing the city, which is the largest governmental body. So I really appreciate that. I didn't hear anything exclusionary about what you were saying. And I think that may be a cue to all of us as we have to kind of learn to listen a little bit differently sometimes. And I thought about that notion of coordinating action. And especially given your position, your notion of coordinating action means implementing laws, changing regs, changing zoning, which is great. That hopefully will be happening. But there's a lot of other coordinated action that may happen outside of your particular sphere of influence, and I think that's how we have to step into our creativity. And I think what you were pointing to, these independent projects, those could be entrepreneurial endeavors, those could be, you know, things that are already happening through or other organizations, et cetera. So I think that's what I'm hearing in all this, is that there's multiple spheres of influence that are all overlapping, but absolutely grateful that you guys have gotten on board and taken the leadership role as the city. So thank you very much.
I wanted to clarify that. Plus, someone said, when you're digging a hole, you got two choices. You can stop digging or keep digging. So my question to, and watch, I'm as new at this as you are. Listen, every time someone speaks, I learn. And when Cheryl speaks, trust me, I'm listening. And the first thing she said was, well, I disagree with you. So I'd like to get clarification on what she heard and why she disagrees. That's one thing. The other thing is, I just wanted to tell you, when I speak for me as a citizen, and then too as a councilman, I look at the past issues that we've had in this community, and I watch the division that occurred over it. Something as simple as the vacation rentals. Something as simple as the Ojai issue. something as, we've had some issues that have come before us that have just broken this community in half. They have decimated us because we lack the ability, one, to listen, and two, to work together to solve the problem. Okay, so my take on this, and when I truly say it, I speak from my heart when I talk about the city, is I really look at the problems that we've had in the past, and I look at the opportunity that we have today to help us to define, is tourism the way we want to go, or do we need an alternative base for our economic sustainability? And so I say this is the process that will help us to discover what it is, how we can improve it, and where we need to go. That's why I'm being selfish when I say the city. Now that doesn't mean that I don't think of the community as a whole. But when I looked at the small problems that we have faced and how we couldn't work together to solve them, seriously, it broke my heart. I couldn't believe that this community, as well as we think of one another, as well as look at what we did in the Thomas Fire. That's the Ojai that we all say we know. And yet I'm getting goosebumps on this, yet we didn't act like that in the last couple debates we had on issues affecting our community. We didn't listen, we didn't support, we didn't reach out. So when I'm speaking about this, I'm sorry, I'm speaking from us as this little small community and how we acted and how we have an opportunity to demonstrate to everyone that we can grow, we can mature, and we can be everything that we think we are and actually share it with everyone that surrounds us. So that's where I'm coming from when I talk about inside to the outside. Now, please tell me why we did this. This is what I was looking for clarification on.
Yeah, so I just have a quick logistical question as I'm trying to figure out where to put my Post-it.
Yep.
I just want to understand where I can lend my skill set. So I'm like, what is the time commitment, or what is an example of an incubated project?
Yep.
Can you just...
So one example of an incubated project, we helped launch a trade association for for tech companies that serve the seafood industry. Another one would be pilot projects that were in specific communities where we were pulling together the seafood supply chain and putting technology at every level to change so it's pilots, it's demonstration projects, it's new initiatives. It could also be something like if the city were to say, we need to look at how we would change all the codes and the long-term vision and the planning for how we would think about stormwater recapture in ways where we have to redesign infrastructure. It might be that we go find an architect who is a master planner who could come in with a team and support that kind of process. So there are different combinations of local people, potential outsiders, and I think if you're going to lead a project, meaning it's your idea, you're the champion, it probably is at least a half-time thing. It's probably not something you're doing in the margins. For that reason, a lot of folks who already are working on problems will maybe come up with a new idea and use the existing platform they're already in. But we also have had folks start new businesses and start new nonprofits out of these kinds of incubated projects. I think there's ways also to be an asset to a project without being the leader. So we've had situations where people who are graphic designers say, I'd like to work on this project. I don't want to launch it, but I can actually put up the website or whatever those kinds of in-kind supports look like. But to get back to the issue of how the process unfolds about how things get communicated and who makes decisions, I think the truth is that we don't have that process figured out yet. But what we are bound to when we take philanthropic capital is that we're not allowed to produce something that gets that only benefits a private entity or that gets hidden from the public. That most foundations have a requirement that the benefit of what you produce becomes public. So what I couldn't do is set up a relationship with the city where we did research and then you said, well, we don't want to release all of that, we only want to release part of that. So that's what I meant about we wouldn't necessarily be able to work in a situation where the city was deciding what information got to make it out. That being said, we still have to figure out what that process looks like. We haven't even talked about what it would look like when we have reports, how they get disseminated, who sees them in the city, and we have this advisory board to put together. It is absolutely appropriate for the city to have some decision making as part of this process. I just think we just don't know exactly what it looks like. It probably, hopefully, doesn't look like working with the government of Indonesia, for example.
I just want to speak from a feeling place, as they say. I felt I'd been sucker punched when Randy spoke about this process being exclusively for the benefit of Ojai City. I have a business in Ojai City. I live in the unincorporated area, and I know there are several people in the room who have a similar situation. So this is a super critical issue for me. I mean, this whole process is meaningless unless it has a broader vision. And I think you embrace that broader vision. So I've got a couple of questions. Number one, is the City of Ojai funding this process in any way?
No.
Okay, I imagine that was the answer. And number two, we need to look at this memorandum of understanding. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it says. I think we need to know. Thank you.
By the way, the memorandum of understanding is on the agenda packet where we approved it. Anybody can read it, but we can re-disseminate it and make it more available.
So I would also just give the brief summary that the MOU is not a contract for deliverables or to do specific work. It's more that we've basically said we're going to partner to try to work through a set of issues for Ojai, and it's the city saying we've agreed to work with CMU. The whole reason for the MOU to exist is that we can't go pitch funders working for a project that hasn't agreed to host us, right? So we can't say we're working in Ojai until someone validates, yeah, you're working in Ojai. And so the city was a logical entity to take that on, and it was an amazing thing that the city council was willing to do that. There aren't any specific promises that are in it. It's more, we've agreed to work together, and it also is dissolvable within 90 days, like on either side. It is not a legally binding situation. It's more that we've agreed to keep moving forward and feeling our way through this, and it gives us the legitimacy to actually bring money to the table. So that was the purpose of it.
And I can tell you that one of my motivations for pushing this and voting for it was the sense that, again, Ojai is a planning partner with the county as a whole for the specific Ojai Valley. That's the structure that I look at. I think you can concur that that's the structure that's set up, and that's what we should do. He wanted to talk, and then
you know, maybe tonight is not about answers, it's about questions and inquiry and expressing ourselves. But I don't want to belabor the point, but I just feel like this does need to be addressed somehow, maybe from Randy, maybe from our speaker. This us versus them was initially, you said, we're not going to be us and them, it's from the ground up. We're here as citizens first, and you know, you laid a groundwork for the evening, but then when Randy spoke, and to some degree what you said also was in contrast to what you said. So I don't know, we can't resolve a problem tonight, but I do feel like, I feel the same as this gentleman did, is there needs to be some kind of agreement, I think, or just something else needs to come forward.
Thank you.
In a technical government thing, the sphere of influence is that the city of Ojai has influence over planning and policy in the valley within a.
And the whole area of interest, we're partners with the county.
Partner, yes. So when both Randy and Bill are talking about hosting and facilitating this systems change multi-year process, I think part of the intention is to be able to influence policy outside of the city from the leadership that evolves from the creativity of the people. Basically, the city of Ojai is a platform for solving the bigger problems, is what I'm hearing, and technically has some policy grounds to influence the county and partner with the county. Am I saying that correctly? So the worry.
Just to get a clear answer, I mean, is the purpose of this whole project to influence governmental policy in which you're coming up with ideas that now they're in charge of applying? Or are you guys, you know, ostensibly going to come up with some sort of incubated project where you're like, we need to get farmers to change to Apuntia and aloe, and then are you going to have to go to the city to ask for permission to go apply that to farmland outside of the city? I don't have a clear answer on how that's working.
So I think some of what is some of what's challenging about this kind of work is that we have organized ourselves as human beings into these compartmentalized places of boundaries and municipalities and different entities that have false boundaries, because if we're talking about systemic issues, it's all the same thing. And so my ceiling of accountability, like what I am accountable to, is the system, right? And so from my perspective, I'm looking at all of it. And the kinds of solutions that we'll come up with they are all gonna have some element, I'm sure, of municipal participation. But it's not specifically geared toward policy. But it would not surprise me if a lot of the stuff that we come up with requires changes in city codes to make it possible. No, they don't stop at the border, and they don't stop at the end of the municipality. They don't stop at the end of Ojai. Like the idea is that whoever comes to the table, whatever we're creating, the sphere of influence is whatever they want to impact.
Does that answer your question?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've noticed a lot in the last couple of years is that a lot of the push has been to go backwards instead of to go forward. It's like fear that change is happening here that is not going to be beneficial. And I think we need to realize, yes, that Ojai is a place that is unique and is somewhat not part of the general mass world. And we should take that to actually see how we can move into the future and how we can, with Carnegie Mellon, actually see a real future that's not based on fear, but is based on love.
Already on. I agree with what was just said, and I also want to thank the city for bringing Carnegie Mellon here. I think, I don't know if you picked it out of thin air, or if you guys brought them in, or who initiated it, but I think it's fabulous. I don't feel that the city. I hear Randy saying that we've had this terrible anger come up. I've lived here almost 30 years now, and we've gone through a lot of things. We've went through Weldon Canyon, Las Arbas was a huge thing. Chain stores were a huge thing. We've gotten through. I mean, people feel strongly in this town, and our voices are heard. In LA, you're one little person out of a sea of voices. You never get heard. So to me, that's a strength. And I think I feel like we're getting confused by labels right now. And I'm listening to what you're saying. I think it's a fantastic idea, and I'm looking forward to putting my stickies all over it. So.
I think I'm harmonizing. I was thinking, Jeremy, what you were saying, I can't imagine doing a stakeholder map and stopping at the borders of those 4 miles. So I think it's just from a scholarly or anthropological approach, it's impossible. And so I'm not really too concerned about it from what I'm hearing and sensing of you're taking a systems approach, you're looking at multidimensional systems, and so it can't actually be that contained. You've got an agreement as a starting point, but I don't think it's possible. You
We're
can't
like
do a
kudzu,
stakeholder
we
map.
go everywhere.
Yeah.
Mr. Powers.
I want to piggyback on what Aubrey was saying about this history we have. I've been here 20 years. I don't call myself a local because there's such a tidal wave of history. But what comes with history and what comes with our past is an attachment to the past and an attachment to the way things are. And when we get too grounded in that, we get blinders on, and possibilities that might exist completely get missed. Certainly there are other cities to look at and model after, certainly up north in Oregon and Seattle and other places in the world that have taken their creativity and their progressive nature and worked out solutions around water. Worked out their solutions around policy and politics, because policy and politics stops a lot of things. But we also have a tendency to put the accountability on the leaders, no matter what size of city or state or nation, and then we don't hold ourselves accountable to our own leadership and bringing forward our own innate creativity that has ideas and solutions that no one else has thought of. It's like I like to say we all have that pet rock idea, and we may not know it, or we may dismiss it because we think, oh, someone else already has that. Someone else is going to think of that. You know, sometimes the most obvious things are right in front of us, and that takes each and every one of us to be involved and speak that. And we may not get our way, but something greater may come out of that. So certainly since the Thomas Fire, our hearts got cracked open. The fire did what it was supposed to do. So it brought us together in a new way. So now it's up to us. What are we going to do with that?